Hey, what's going on, guys? It's Michael here from MMOBomb.com. I'm at PAX Prime here in Seattle. I just got done checking out Gigantic. I was able to play a little bit of it. Of course, it's the new 3D MOBA from the somewhat new team. You haven't really heard anything from you guys in the past, really. Motiga, specifically. You guys are actually based here in Seattle. I'm actually here with James, who is one of the designers on Gigantic. James, how are you doing today?
Fantastic. Show's going well so far.
Great to hear that. Now, James, like I said before, I played a little bit of Gigantic for the first time. It is very much a much more open world MOBA than your typical MOBA. The maps seem very large. You play from a third-person perspective. Yeah. You got some of the traditional MOBA elements where you have your characters. They have their own unique abilities, sort of like what they're good at, you know, range, melee, etc. What were some of the, when you guys went in to design Gigantic, what were some of like the key elements that you wanted to make sure your game had that other MOBAs maybe not necessarily incorporated into them?
Yeah, you know, it's funny. That's not really the way we thought about it. In fact, the term MOBA basically didn't come up, even though I think the comparisons are fair, and there are definitely some influences that we bring from traditional MOBAs. We really talked a lot more about shooters and action games, and the goal was to make a game that would be really fun to play, be dynamic in terms of its action, a lot of, you know, jumping around, running around, and dodging, aiming precisely, all those sorts of things, but they could work as a serious competitive game. Background for some of the people on the team was working on that kind of stuff. You know, previously for me, the Guild Wars games, and then prior to that, StarCraft. And so what I wanted to do is try to draw on some of the things that I thought went well in those games in terms of making a serious competitive game, and just say, you know, how could we bring together some of these kind of action elements and these, you know, gigantic creatures into a good competitive experience.
So let's talk a little bit about the name Gigantic. You talked about gigantic creatures. What exactly do you mean by that? For those who don't know what Gigantic is, it sort of plays into the name. What are sort of those incorporations? Yeah,
so the game is 5-on-5. You know, you pick a hero ahead of time, and they've got a unique set of abilities. But there's a sort of sixth member on your team that's not controlled by a player, and that's what we call a guardian. And it's a massive creature. If we look over here, you can see. So it's, you know, like 150 feet tall and incredibly powerful. And the goal of the game is to kill the enemy team's guardian. The guardian will resurrect you if you're dead, and the guardians are really powerful. And you know, can help you out in combat. You can, by going across the map, summon creatures that power them up. You can, whenever you kill an enemy, it also powers your guardian up. You can also like go attack the enemy guardian, strike it in the heart, and steal power from it, like lowering its power, giving power to yours. When your guardian's powered up, it'll rampage across the map, actually reshaping the battlefield in your team's favor. And so the size of the guardians, the fact that they're the objective, but also just the scale in which things happen in the game, and you know, something of the kind of fun spirit of the game is all, I think, wrapped into why we went with the name Gigantic.
Very interesting. So there are two guardians that we've seen. They're the one behind us, and then there's somewhat of a dragon guardian, if you will. Are those the primary guardians, or are there going to be other ones based on different maps? Are you going to have different maps? Those are some of the questions I'm wondering.
Yeah, we expect to have several more maps. You know, we'll see based on how production goes, how many we have when we first come out, and a lot more guardians. The guardian's actually something that you choose if you're playing as a guild. Sort of your guild has a guardian that they're able to build up and customize and bring into fights. If you're doing kind of a pickup match, you can align yourself with basically an NPC guild, and that means you're fighting with their guardian.
When you align yourself with these certain guardians, are there particular sort of strategies or elements that come into play based on what guardian you choose?
Yeah, we want to differentiate the guardians. It's always, you know, a tricky balance when you're looking at serious competitive play to not to figure out what your boundaries are of what you can change and not change between them. The last set of differences I had between them, I didn't like that much. So right now we've dialed that back a little bit. But the intent is for them to be different and for there to be kind of strategic choices you make.
Are there any games that you sort of drew upon? We mentioned some of the different genres, and like shooters and RPGs and such. One thing I did notice is that there's really a lack of minions. There's like the areas where you can sort of capture and have a minion guardian that, but guarding that. But is there a particular sort of game set or a set of games that you looked at? You're like, we want to be somewhat like this, kind of bring those elements from those particular games, and anything like you drew inspiration from?
Yeah. Well, I mentioned before some games that I designed that I was drawing from those, but then in terms of other things, there's a lot, even you look at the entire last decade, there's been a really interesting push, mostly coming out of Asia in terms of action RPG multiplayer kind of stuff that I felt like hadn't been brought into a kind of serious competitive game. There's a lot of different shooters. For me, going back to the late 90s, the original Team Fortress mod, just seeing really cool, fast-paced, class-based, characters are doing really different things that complement each other, and some of them are maybe more focused on killing, some maybe more focused on objectives, but not necessarily the kind of Holy Trinity relationship that you see in RPGs, but being able to see that you could do some really interesting things with class interactions. And then even back then you had attempts to do kind of fantasy shooters, which in some sense you could think of Gigantic as, that I felt like there wasn't a lot of times when you try to do a fantasy shooter, there's I think a momentum that takes you toward making it just a regular shooter sort of reskinned. And what we tried to do here was draw on a lot of what we'd seen from more action-oriented RPG games to say you could bring in a real sort of spellcasting feel into this really fast-paced shooter combat.
Interesting. Now, I did notice that I spent the majority of my time during the match of Gigantic fighting other players versus fighting, say, NPC monsters like you would see in other MOBAs. There wasn't really lanes, if you will. It was much more of a sprawling map with these control points. Can you talk a little bit, I touched on those before, can you talk a little bit about those control points and how they sort of shape the battlefield? I guess that's how it is.
Yeah. I think the important thing for me was trying to make sure that there was freedom for players. I wanted to make sure there was, from the get-go, real strategic decisions you could make. And so that's why there aren't lanes. There's the ability to just sort of go across the map. Even looking at RTSs, there are different traditions there, but one of the things that I like is the ability to put pressure on the opponent from the beginning. And so that's what we tried to do here with that. But you need some stuff to structure the battle still. It can't just be go anywhere you want, do anything you want. People need some anchors to kind of focus on. And so what we ended up doing was defining these areas of the map where there are summoning circles. And you can summon a creature there. Every player decides what roster of potential creatures they bring. And, some take longer to summon, some, are quick to summon, some more powerful. They have their combat abilities, but then they are also have different strategic abilities, simple things like regen or ones that will detect enemies, sort of show their positions on the map, ones that make it easier for you to summon other creatures, so you can think of it as sort of a strategic build-up. Just sort of depends on how you want to play that. But those points become, a lot of times in the beginning of the game, the focal point of working for map control. I mentioned that you're trying to build up power for your Guardian. And the way that you win the game is to kill the enemy Guardian, right? And the only way that you can actually hurt it is if your Guardian powers up and knocks it vulnerable first. So when he's stunned and is lying down vulnerable, that's when you can hurt him. So you start out focused on building power. And there are, because there are 3 different ways, you have to kind of mix it up. But the most obvious one is you're always looking at that map, and if you control more of the map, your creatures are giving more power to your Guardian than the enemy team is getting. So by having that focal point, by having stuff that kind of naturally draws players, stepping back just a little bit, it's important when thinking about a game like this to think about the high-end competitive play, make sure there's going to be enough strategic depth and interesting options, but also when people are jumping in and experiencing casually, how's it going to work? Having, a clear kind of front line, because this is the summoning circle that we're fighting over, helps draw people, to the same location. So if you're playing in a pickup group and, you're not necessarily that coordinated, at least there's a simple oh yeah, maybe we should go to this spot that we're all fighting over. So it really helped focus things. We also wanted to make sure that the game from the start was about fighting the other players, but give you some other stuff to kill too. It's nice for everybody to get some chance to pad their stats a little bit.
That's really great. So Gigantic right now is in alpha. We talked before this that there was a little like friends and family currently ongoing. How close are you guys towards moving towards beta? What are you sort of looking to add before you go into beta?
Yeah, there's a whole range of things we want to do before we get to beta. You know, what I'd say is alpha started last week, so we've got a little ways to go in alpha. You know, I think it's really important not to rush things. When you're making a competitive game, being able to take in player feedback is really important. And so our goal at every step of the way is to make sure that we're, you know, answering the questions we need to about the project and making the game better, not necessarily to hit a specific date. If you're working on the game, forget I said that last part.
So can we expect Gigantic, I know there's not like a specific date or anything, can we expect Gigantic in 2015 or maybe a beta, the early part of 2015? Or?
We should be making a lot of noise next year, I'll just say that.
Okay, sounds good. Well, James, I appreciate it so much for you coming out to talk to us about Gigantic, and we look forward to seeing what comes next. Thanks.
Awesome, thank you very much.